We're glad that you've come tonight. We're having a great time, and I'm Paul Goodman, and I've been asked to say a few words in reference to this guy, Jim. I want to ask you a question. Do you know your neighbor? You know, Jesus was asked a question one day, and the question was this: who is my neighbor? Now, my wife and I have just moved into a new neighborhood, and we're still trying to meet our neighbors. Sometimes it's not easy when you're in a brand new subdivision and everybody in the neighborhood is brand new, so we're still trying to meet our neighbors. But this question that came to Jesus, who is my neighbor, was asked by a lawyer. Now, you know, if you're being asked a question by anybody, you need to be a little bit careful how you answer it. But when you're being asked a question by a lawyer, you really need to be a little bit careful about how you answer that question. Possibly, there are some hidden innuendos in that question. Well, Jesus had just posed to the crowd of people he was talking to the greatest responsibility of mankind toward God. He took the 10 commandments and all of the additional commandments that have been added to it, and he summed them up in 2 precepts. 1, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. 2, love your neighbor as yourself. So the implications of what Jesus had said are huge. It implies that I have a responsibility to my God to love Him with all of my heart, soul, mind, and strength. But I also have a responsibility to my neighbor to care for that person and to show concern for that person like I show concern for myself. The lawyer thought to himself, we've got to narrow this down a little bit. Now, I realize that God deserves my love and devotion, but my neighbor? I'm to care for my neighbor like I care for myself? So he wanted to narrow it down a little bit, and he asked Jesus, well, just who is my neighbor? I'm sure he thought Jesus would take any number of ways to define this neighbor as being somebody who was close in proximity. That means I don't have to care about people that are further away from me, or a person who was within my community, my own small community. I don't have to care about people beyond my community. Perhaps he thought Jesus would narrow it down at least to their religious group that he was a part of. Or maybe he would say that this has to do with people of similar interest to me. We have a lot of ways of identifying and grouping people, don't we? So the lawyer's question was really, how do I identify who my neighbor is? Well, Jesus didn't answer him directly. He didn't give him the type of answer that says, well, if they're within a half a mile of you, they're your neighbor. Or if they're within your ethnic group, they're your neighbor. Or within your religious affiliation, they're your neighbor. He told a story. Jesus told the story in answer to the question, who is my neighbor? You know the story. We call it the story of the Good Samaritan, don't we? The guy who went along life's highway, fell among thieves, was beaten and robbed, left for dead, and along comes several other people who just ignored him. A man who was not a part of his natural community, not a part of his ethnic origin, not a part of his religious community. He didn't have proximity. He just happened to be walking along life's road, and he took compassion on him. I'm going to retell the story of the Good Samaritan, and I'm going to give that unnamed man who fell among thieves, I'm going to give him a name. And you know the name I'm going to give him. You see, Jim was just walking along life's highway. Just walking along, minding his own business, enjoying his family, enjoying his friends, enjoying his work, enjoying church, enjoying his relationship to the Lord. He didn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. You see, we all come into life with certain expectations, and sometimes we have dreams and ambitions that we expect to have in our life, but we also have realities. We know what is day to day, we know responsibility, we know the cares and the concerns, we know the challenges of life. But Jim was about to have his reality altered, radically altered. He fell among thieves. You say, oh, no. You've got your story mixed up, Paul. He didn't fall among thieves. He got sick. Well, if you don't think illness is a thief, look at Jim. In a matter of hours, he was robbed of strength. In a matter of a few days, he was robbed of consciousness. He was beaten and robbed and left all but dead on the very edge of life and death. To me, that's falling among thieves. In this case, the thief was a flu virus that just about took his life. Now, Jim was given all of the care and attention that loving companion, friends and neighbors, the medical community, everything that could be done for Jim was done by those who cared. They placed him in the care and keeping of those who would best assist him in his road to recovery. But you know and I know days passed and it didn't look good. In fact, it seemed like Jim's recovery was doubtful. We passed by. We walked along life's road and we looked in on Jim. And you know what? We really cared. We were concerned. We prayed. All of us. This group of people were concerned. We walked by Jim, giving care and concern and prayer and trusting and hoping that somehow his recovery would be made. You know, people did awesome things for Jan and for Jim. They took extra care to try and assist them in this time of Jim's problems. And you know, I know very well that care and concern was so deeply appreciated. But there was still a huge burden left on the shoulders of Jim and Jan, his wife. A huge burden. A burden of extended care, a burden of financial pressure. Just how to cope with all of that. But then some people said, let's do more than just individually giving them a hand. Let's do more than just pass by and breathe a prayer. Let's get together and do something major. Let's put our hands together, our hearts together, our pocketbooks together, and let's join with Jim and Jan in an effort to see them really find recovery. Not just physical recovery, but financial recovery. To this group of people here tonight, I think Jesus would say, you're Jim's neighbors. You looked, you saw, you cared, you came, you gave, you prayed, and you stood with Jim and Jan when he had been beaten and robbed and left all but dead. Jim and Jan have hope because people cared. Because a band of people who dared to say, you're my neighbor, Jim. You're people that we care about, Jan. So we've come together tonight to join our hearts and our hands together for Jim. And Jesus is looking down and he's saying, you have done well. Let's do this right, folks. Every opportunity we have. Maybe you haven't done any more than just come and give that very, very minimal fee to enter in. But we can still give beyond that. We can say to Jan and Jim, we're going to stand with you because we know that we're neighbors. So God bless you. Thank you for coming tonight. And Jan, God love you, girl. God bless you.
Very nice.